Well, I'm so excited today to have Professor Kevin Marsh with us on Shaping African Conversations. Kevin is a professor at Oxford, where actually my own daughter's finishing her PhD, and I'm a regular visitor to such a beautiful, beautiful city, a beautiful intellectual feeling that you get when you get there. But Kevin has spent 29 years in Kenya. So, I'm trying to figure that one out, Kevin. Right. Professor at Oxford, but have spent 29 years in Kenya. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, well, I think I'm very lucky to have been able to do that. It's because my field is originally tropical medicine, and obviously tropical medicine, you're going to be based in the tropics. Oxford is great from that point of view in that it gives you enormous freedom. So my appointment has been at Oxford for many years. But my work has been in Kenya. So I lived, as you say, 28, 29 years in Kenya. 25 of those living full-time in Kenya all the time. And then for the last 4 years, I spend half of my time in Kenya, half my time in Oxford, which is, I feel, extremely lucky.
Very blessed,
yep.
Very blessed. Yep. And every time I go to Oxford, I interact with the African students there. And I can see, the amount that, that they're sort of absorbing from the university, and the hope that they're going to go back to their countries. But you've just started something called the African Oxford Initiative.
Yeah.
And what's that about, and what's the reason, what's the objective?
Okay, well, I guess partly it began slightly personally because of my engagement with Africa. When I started to spend more time in Oxford, I wanted to know the full range of connections that were going on. As we began to do that, I realized there's an enormous amount, stemming back a long time, right across the university, not just in health and medicine or even in science, right across all parts of the university. But it's very unconnected. So it would be hard to find out from any website or any publication what's actually going on. So a group of us, staff and postdoctoral students, decided to come together to form a platform, basically to promote the idea of strategic engagement with Africa as a priority for Oxford University. Partly as a communication platform and partly as a funding platform to raise funds to begin to do some of the activities which we feel will facilitate engagement with African institutions, with African colleagues, African scholars. So that's what the Africa Oxford Initiative is.
Wow, that's really exciting. And the head of it, the person who runs it, is Kenyan.
Yes. So my colleague, Anne McKenna, is the program coordinator. Anne and I have worked very closely on this in the last few years. We've got a great team. Also have a fantastic Ghanaian communications manager, Kukwa Manful, and then various other people who support us. But no, it's great that...
Anne's amazing. I've met her a few times, and she's from Isiolo.
She is, yeah.
And she's just such a, she's just a ball of fire. She's absolutely amazing. So I think you're actually very lucky.
We are.
Very lucky to have her. But talking about... collaborating with African universities. How do we, not everybody's going to go to Oxford.
No.
How do we ensure that there's an Oxford equivalent in Africa?
I think this is really important, and I should say my own, kind of starting point on this is that we wouldn't want everyone to go to Oxford. And indeed, as you know, half of my life is spent in Kenya, but at the African Academy of Sciences, and there, our engagement is with African institutions and building African institutions. So it's within that context that we think about the relationship between, say, UK universities and African universities. No, the real job is to build African universities and research institutions to deliver for development in Africa, and I think many of us are engaged in that. And I see the role of UK institutions or even global institutions, the great global universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford, so on and so forth. I see their role as being one of facilitating and supporting and making available certain things which are perhaps not readily available elsewhere, both in terms of experience and also infrastructure. But it's definitely a supporting role. We wouldn't by any means say everyone should go to Oxford. I think it's got very specific things it can deliver and help with and facilitate with. But what really has to be built is a much stronger university and research system within the continent.
Great. Recently you just got awarded the Smite Prize, which was $1 million.
Yep.
And you could have kept that.
Yep.
But you didn't.
No.
And tell us what you did with the $1 million.
Well, I feel I was very fortunate to be awarded the Smite Prize. This is from Kuwait. Dr. Smite was a Kuwaiti physician who was very invested in Africa. And the prize is for development in Africa, and it's given in health, agriculture, agriculture and nutrition, and then education. So what I decided to do with it, which I felt was the only thing I could really do with it, was invest it back into African science, particularly into young people. So I split it between the young affiliates of the African Academy of Sciences, who are emerging research leaders across the continent, and the Africa Oxford Initiative. And I felt we were really very fortunate to get the chance to do that.
So that's given the Africa Oxford Initiative a head start?
Absolutely, yes. We have other funding from different sources, and we're trying to build the funding for it. But no, we were extremely fortunate to be given that head start, and we're very grateful for it.
I think Africa is very fortunate that they had you to actually give that money to ensure that happens. But looking at academics based in African institutions, they often don't get the kind of respect that they would if they were working in Europe or the US.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about why.
Well, it's a tough life being an academic in an African institution, and I think again, rather than sort of focusing on the day-to-day problems, I think one has to get a perspective on this, and I think it stems from investment, and it stems from how important one thinks academia is. African heads of states have agreed, all of the 55 countries in Africa have agreed on a vision of Africa, sort of Vision 63, which requires knowledge-based economies. And to have knowledge-based economies, you've got to have a strong academic base for that. So there's an absolute need to do that. And just to put it in context, for Africa to come up to the international average, not the average for the sort of, if you like, the so-called resource countries, but just the global average, in terms of researchers per head of population, we would need to have an extra 1 million PhDs really very quickly in Africa. And that's a massive task. So that's the scale. So that's the context against which, if you're building an academic career in Africa, you're overstretched, under-resourced, you're spending a lot of time teaching. Teaching is very important, but it's, research is important too. So you have a setting where everything's against you, as it were. Funding, both personal and institutional, far too much to do, and that produces what you've described as this sense of being a bit isolated, a bit ignored. But that can be tackled, and there are many institutions in Africa where that's being tackled. So I wouldn't want to be pessimistic about it, but that's our job, is to tackle that.
And how can we ensure the African academics that are at Oxford and all the these other amazing universities return to Africa?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's sort of the brain drain. Cause, every time I go there and I talk to a lot of the kids, that I don't hear, the sort of coming home bit.
I think this is a really important area, and a couple of things to say about it. Firstly, there are many reasons why people stay where they are, and I don't think it's for us to make judgments about people. You often hear people say, well, they should come back and this sort of thing. But you have many reasons in life why you go somewhere, including family, children, so on and so forth. So I don't make any judgment about that. But I, again, try and look at, well, what can we do about that? And there's one absolutely critical requirement. If you're developing an internationally competitive career in anything, you will only base yourself where you can flourish in that career. And in academia and research, you need certain things, and that's a critical mass of infrastructure and people and intellectual atmosphere. And if that doesn't easily exist, then you wouldn't go there. So a really smart Kenyan researcher who could get a job at, anywhere in the world, they'd have to be sure they could do the same job within Kenya. And there are places emerging where that can happen, but that's the challenge, is to make those environments. I think the second part of that is that we often talk about brain drain, and some people then say, no, we should talk about research, brain circulation. But I think we shouldn't make a dichotomy between, well, people outside the continent working at institutions in America or Europe, they're not a loss if they're contributing in one way or another. Yeah. And there are many ways in terms of collaboration, for instance. So rather than saying to it's hard to say to someone who's been 20 years in an American university, oh, you should bring your research group back to Nairobi or Uganda or whatever. I think what we can be saying to them is encouraging them and providing the resources to enable them to engage with colleagues in those institutions on joint research projects. So you get a circulation of students from both African institutions and American and British and other institutions. So it doesn't have to be a one or other thing. It doesn't have to be stay or come back. I think it's more to do with engaging.